Montville, Maine, a town small enough that people still leave their doors unlocked at night and where neighbors check in on each other. Quiet dirt roads weave through pine forests like ribbons. It's the kind of place where life feels steady, familiar, and safe. But on April, in the afternoon in 2022, that sense of safety was torn apart in an instant by an explosion so powerful that three people died, a home was shattered, and a community was left entirely grieving. Today in Strawberry Ink, we tell the story of Stuart Nichols, who people knew as Nick, as well as two other people, Rocco Taddeo and Robert Gorham. The three men, brought together by friendship, family, and a sense of service, were taken by a tragic fire that turned an act of help into heartbreak. It was April 13th, 2022, a Wednesday, when Nick Nichols, who was 74 years old, had just installed a used propane powered cooking stove in his kitchen. He'd done this sort of thing before. Nick was practical, handy, and had lived in that Montville home for years. However, his installation was not so smart. Known for his white beard and warm spirit, he was the kind of man who always had time for a game of cribbage. That day, his 88-year-old neighbor and friend, Rocco Taddeo, stopped by. Rocco was full of life for his age. Everyone in town seemed to know him, and everyone had the same thing to say. This man was kind, generous, and always helping someone. Also, there was Robert Gorham, who people called Bob. He was Nick's cousin, 78 years old, having been a firefighter serving the town of Boxton. He'd spent nearly 4 decades with the Boxton Fire Rescue Group, always living by the principle that you give back to the place that gave to you. What brought the three of them together that day? Maybe Nick had asked for a hand with the stove. Maybe it was just a kind of neighborly check-in that happens all the time in a town like Montville. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. At around 3:30 p.m., a propane leak, likely from one of several appliances, ignited. Investigators later confirmed that Taddeo had been attempting to light the stove at the time, which is a crucial mistake. You never do that when you know propane is there, because the propane might be leaking like it was in this case. The result was devastating. Rocco Taddeo died instantly inside the home from the explosion. Nick Nichols and Robert Gorham were thrown out of the home from the blast and landed at nearby trees. That was by sheer force of explosion. So at this point, one of them blew up into pieces from the explosion from the stove, and two others flew out of the home as if Superman were in town. Emergency responders rushed them to the Maine Medical Center in Portland. Both succumbed to their injuries. They died. Their injuries were too complicated for them to be saved. Taddeo's remains were transported to the medical examiner's office in Augusta, while the other two were kept in that hospital. The entire town felt it. Jody Martin, Montville's town clerk, had spoken to Nick and Rocco days before. He stated, Nick, that he had been having a wonderful week so far. And this clerk said that these two were really, really good men, always willing to help, always full of good energy. In a small town, every loss echoes. but this one hit especially deep. Funeral services were held across several towns, each making a farewell that felt far too soon. Nick was honored with a visitation and service on April 24th at the Chad Poitras Funeral Chapel. He was cremated. Rocco Tadeo's arrangements were handled by the Riposta Funeral Home of Belfast. His service was held at the St. Mary's Church in Franklin, with a community reception that followed. He too was cremated. Then, Robert Gorham, the firefighter and community pillar, was mourned with a fitting tribute. His visitation was held on April 29th, not in a chapel, but at the Brixton Fire Department's Bar Mill Station. There, surrounded by fellow firefighters and friends, Bob received full firefighter honors, including the traditional last alarm. He was also cremated. These funeral homes have been used for so many elderly people who have died in the towns, people's grandfathers, but the directors and the rest of the staff never expected to have three victims of an explosion end up in their care. There's something haunting about how it all happened so quickly. 1 minute, the three were helping each other, neighbors, family, and the next. But then they were gone. Was it a murder suicide, an accident? The words don't quite capture the complexity. Investigators ruled out intentional harm, but the grief remains lingering like the smoke that rose from Nick's house that day. The tragedy exposed the very fragility of the routines we take for granted. Lighting a stove, inviting someone over, and trying to help. They were not famous. There were no breaking news tickers, but the legacies of Nick, Rocco, and Bob were carved into the daily rhythm of life in small town Maine, where helping out was never questioned, but kindness was assumed. My goal was to get all 50 states in Strawberry Ink this year. I am reaching that goal. I will let you know in a later episode if I do officially, but anyways, I came across a news article discussing this. It's not a headliner, but I believe that it's worth covering. What I think occurred is a big mistake. He had no intention to kill, but he was not thinking when lighting this dangerous stove. His prefrontal cortex was now underdeveloped. Three lives, three losses, one explosion that ended it all, but also one story that we remember now. This is Strawberry Ink, and I'm your host, Santiago Gabriel. If you found meaning in today's episode, please follow, leave a review, and if you know a story, let me know about your town, city, or territory, your people, your truth. Send it over to strawberryink6@gmail.com. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and remember, even the smallest stories deserve to be told. Thank you and have a good rest of your day.